Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Skyline Room here at the Museum of Flight. My name is J.D. Winnikin. I work in public programs here at the museum. I'm also a historian of the Second World War. And really, for somebody like me who works both in the Flight Museum and as a historian of this time period, frankly, it does not get any better than this when it comes to special guests. And so we'll get to our guest in just a moment. A couple of items really quickly to cover. If you have not done so already, if you could silence your cell phones in whatever way is best for you, if you would go ahead and do that. We are recording the presentation, so it's helpful to catch all the sound that we don't have the phones going off. Also, if for whatever reason we do need to exit the facility quickly, you can jump through the glass if you want, but if you want less than a less harmful way to go, there's a stairwell behind you that leads downstairs, as well as the stairs outside the back. We ask you not to use the elevators, of course, in an emergency. I'd like to welcome all members of the museum here today. This is one of the many benefits of membership at the Museum of Flight, being able to come to these types of programs for free. If you paid a daily admission today to the museum, you can deduct for the next 30 days, you have the option, you can deduct your daily admission from a membership if you'd like to do that. So if you're interested in that, when you head back downstairs after the program, we have a membership desk right in the middle of the lobby. You can talk with them and they'll set that up for you. Okay, we have a number of different options for membership. Just to give you an idea of what we'll be doing here this afternoon, our guest will speak for about an hour. We'll take some questions and answers after that. We have a handheld mic that we will bring around. One of our docents, Paula Clark, who's sitting right up front, will have the mic. We ask you to raise your hand and she'll bring the mic to you. I can imagine all of you have questions. We can't get to all of you. We'll get to as many of you as we can. And then after the question and answer, which I'll be in charge of saying when that's done, but when that's done, our guest will actually be down in the lobby. There's a table set down in the lobby where you can come down and meet him yourself. You can also get his autograph if you would like. However, this matters, only one autograph per person, please. Okay, as you can tell, it's going to be a little bit of demand. So he'll be downstairs in the lobby after that, and I'll be there to remind you. Okay, so, all right. A couple of things too in terms of upcoming events. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in the Second World War in this room right now. Next week's program on Saturday, June 22nd, again here at the museum, tentatively scheduled for this room, but it might be in the theater. We'll see, we're not sure. But tentatively scheduled for this room will be the Bravo 369 program, a look back at the American Lend-Leased Aircraft Aid program. There's the anniversary of that is coming up, and there are a number of experts on the American Lend-Lease program that will be here to talk about that, all wrapped around a commemorative flight of T-6s that will be flying the old route to Russia next year. The program, the company that's doing that, or the individuals that are doing that will be here. It's going to be fascinating. Included on the panel will be the senior curator of the Museum of Flight, Dan Hagedorn, who has actually written a book, a very well-received book on the U.S. Lend-Lease program. So we encourage you to be here next week for that, 2 p.m. again as usual. And there are a number of other upcoming events as well here at the Museum of Flight having to do with the Second World War. You can see a lot of that in our flight plans, which are down in the lobby. You can take a look at what's coming up. Okay, you did not come here to hear me talk. I know that for sure. So let me go ahead and do the introductions here and provide a little bit of background context. Our guest today, of course, is Ed Saylor. Ed Saylor is one of the 4 remaining original Doolittle raiders from the April 1942 Doolittle raid on Tokyo and other cities in Japan. Ed was a flight engineer on the 15th aircraft, known as TNT, and he will tell you the whole story behind that. But he's asked me to give a little bit of larger context. A lot of you in here know the raid very, very well. Even more of you have probably seen the film 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, or the last 20 minutes of a really bad movie called Pearl Harbor, which Ed told me on the way in. They didn't get the raid stuff, the training right at all in that film, in case you're wondering. Big surprise, right? But nevertheless, a lot of you know a lot about the raid, but there are people who don't necessarily know a lot about it, so they're just going to give you the background on this. Between the attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941 and this surprise raid by the Doolittle Raiders in April of 1942, The United States was, to put it mildly, on the defensive against the Japanese in the Pacific. A number of American outposts fell to the Japanese, and of course, by the time of the raid, practically all the Philippine Islands had fallen. The holdout of Corregidor was ongoing, and of course, Wake Island had fallen. A number of setbacks. Of course, the British had their Pacific fleet effectively neutralized by the Japanese the day after Pearl Harbor, and so it was just a bad time. And certainly American industrial strength was certainly not up to speed yet the way it would be quite soon in the war. And so this raid, conducted in secret, not discovered until a Japanese picket ship saw the USS Hornet about 400 miles or so before launch. All of this was meant to be a shot in the arm to American morale, as well as to punch back against the Japanese. So 16 aircraft, 16 B-25 U.S. Army Air Corps aircraft, loaded onto the USS Hornet, the flight deck of the USS Hornet. Ed was telling me earlier they took up almost the entire flight deck when they loaded them up. Went out to sea, commanded, of course, by General Jimmy Doolittle, and was the only one who really seemed to know where all of this was going, among a few other people, and Ed will tell you the story, I'm sure, about that. Sailed out westward in secret with one intention: to launch these land-based bombers off the deck of this carrier and send them on a one-way trip. Not that they would all get killed in the process, that was the hope that it wouldn't happen, but that they would land in China, as the original plan went. They would land in China overnight, refuel at Chinese bases, take off, fly the rest of the way to safety, since they were not going to be able to return to the carrier, no way to land on them. Well, because the flight was discovered, or because the ships were discovered 400 miles earlier than planned, planes had to take off 400 miles earlier, which meant they did not have the fuel to get as far into China as they needed to. And so pilots had to fly to Japan, hopefully accomplish the mission of dropping bombs on 5 different Japanese cities and make it out alive. They were not going to be going in with any fighter protection at all, too far, so they were going in on their own. They flew in at wave top level on the deck, and then, Ed told me on the drive in, they dropped their bombs over Japanese cities from 1,500 feet. Depending on where planes were flying in Japan, they were going to be over the Japanese homeland for at least an hour, and then had to fly at least another hour or two, depending where they were, across the South China Sea to the Chinese coast, and then who knows what was going to happen. And certainly, the amazing thing is, the planes got there, they dropped their bombs, they went undetected. Ed was telling me that flying by Japanese battleships, just kind of not shooting at them, dropped their bombs on different cities. TNT dropped its bombs on Kobe. They continued to fly, and eventually they all found some place to land or ditch somewhere. Some ended up in Soviet territory, and those pilots were detained. Some ditched off the coast of China. TNT ditched off the coast of China. And some were not quite as fortunate. And so certainly there were fatalities. And the raid, when it was finally announced, was a huge shot in the arm to American morale. It's really one of the first, which you can call the first victory of the Second World War for the United States. And Ed was telling me they were aware that it had been a morale boost. After the war, it became clear, though, that it was much more than that. To the Japanese, this was a shock. The fact that American bombers had seemingly come out of nowhere and had dropped bombs on the capital was an immense blow to the prestige and the honor of the Japanese, particularly the Japanese Imperial Navy, who had been bound to protect, who had sworn to defend the Japanese homeland from all invaders. This was a stab at their honor, and certainly personal apologies were made to the emperor and this type of thing. So it turns out, historians like Gordon Prang and others discovered after the war that because of this raid, the Japanese adjusted their tactical approach in the Pacific for at least the next 6 months. And there's a direct connection between the shock of this raid and the decision by the Japanese High Command, particularly the Imperial Navy, to try and lure the American fleet back out of Pearl Harbor to sink them for hopefully what was the final engagement, which turned out to be the Battle of Midway. And if you know anything about the Second World War, you know that's a decisive turning point in the Pacific War when the Japanese are defeated by American forces at Midway. I find it very interesting, just to give you some context. When the Midway raid happened, Ed Saylor was still working his way through China trying to get out. He didn't get out until July of 1942. So there is the context for that. Certainly, our guest is going to have a lot to say about that. Very rarely do we get an opportunity to have a historical figure of this caliber here, as many as we do get. And this is being recognized around the country as a really important group to commemorate. You may know there is an effort going on in the US Congress right now to award the Congressional Gold Medal to the Doolittle Raiders. There are 4 remaining. I have flyers for this if you are interested in knowing more of who to contact. They're sitting on a back table out there. We'll also have some downstairs if you're interested in knowing more about how you can sign on to that effort to help this group to get the Congressional Gold Medal. Without any further ado, I would really like to welcome, please join me in welcoming our special guest today, Ed Saylor.
Where was I?
Okay. All right.
If I say where was I, somebody tell me where I was in my story.
Okay, front row, that's your responsibility. All right, somebody will, or I'll shout it from the back.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
It's a little embarrassing to forget where I was at in my story.
I forgot where it was this morning.
Yeah. A nice comfortable place to lean on. A little bit about myself. I was raised on a cattle ranch in Montana. I had never seen an airplane before I joined the Army Air Corps. I had seen an airplane flying over, but that was it, and some pictures in the magazines. So I had it all to learn about airplanes and the rest of the world. We were 30 miles from a town of 300 people on a dirt road, and no car for a long time. This little town where I went to high school was 300 people, and it's still 300 people today. And people ask me how come no increase in population there. I don't really know, but I tell them every time a baby is born, somebody leaves town. So, still 300 people. That's a good explanation. So, yeah, after high school, I was looking for a job. Right tail end of the Depression, there was no jobs. So I joined the Army Air Corps to be an aircraft mechanic. I seen a poster in the post office that said the Air Corps was paying $72 a month for airplane mechanics. Of course, in 1939, that was a livable wage. I didn't know anybody that made that much money. So I said, well, I'm really interested in airplanes. So I said, I'm going to go into the Army Air Corps and be a mechanic. And that's what I did. I went to school, became a crew chief on a B-25 and also a flight engineer. I went everywhere the airplane went and done all the maintenance on it. In those days, there were no maintenance specialists, so I had to do everything on the airplane. Instrument, electric, hydraulic, whatever there was, that's what I did. Of course, later on in the war, it wasn't practical for one guy to try to get all that done, so we came up with specialists. But for my part, I had to do it all at that time. So we were in Columbia, South Carolina at the air base, and somebody came along looking for volunteers for a classified mission with no information on what the mission was going to be about. But they wanted 16 airplanes with crews. And of course, I was crew chief on one of the airplanes, so I thought this would be a good time for me to go with my own airplane, and I'll be doing the job I'm already trained for. And so I went. We'd done training down at Eglin Field, Florida. We had a lower gun turret in the airplane, took it out, put in a 65-gallon gas tank, and took everything out we wouldn't need to make the airplane lighter. And we had a long-range flight ahead of us. We didn't know where to, but we got the picture there that it was going to be a long range. and practice short field takeoffs and stuff. And we wound up in Alameda Naval Air Station, California. We still don't know anything about where we're going. General Doolittle said, if you ask me a question, I'm not going to answer you, so don't bother. And that's the way it went. We knew nothing. So at that Naval Air Station, it has taxi down beside the dock, and there was an aircraft carrier, Horn, sitting there. Then I began to get the picture that we were going to go on a carrier. There had been no talk about an aircraft carrier up to that time. So we put all 16 airplanes on the deck of that carrier, and it took up the whole flight deck. So our thought at that time was that we were being transported someplace it's too far to fly. And that was okay, that made sense. So a little while, a day or two after that, they had us reshuffle all the airplanes, and now all 16 airplanes are on the back half of the flight deck, and that exposed our little runway. So then we knew that we're going to be taken off from the carrier. If anybody else knew that, I didn't. I've never heard anybody say that, any other guys say that they knew. Anyway, that was a moment of truth right there. So after, and they took up, as I said, the whole flight deck of the carrier. So in a day or two, they had us reshuffle the airplanes and expose that 400 plus, 450 or so foot runway. So we knew we were going to be taken off. So, and we were, a few days after that, they finally told us we were going to bomb Japan. And that was some real news to us. Nobody ever thought that, you know. So somebody said, well, what was your reaction? Well, the Navy cheered. They were happy. And the Air Force didn't cheer. What did we get into here, you know? So that's how we found out. And we continued across the Pacific, uneventful. Partway across, I was a crew chief on this airplane. I had to take care of it. Developed a problem on the right engine that meant it had to be fixed or the airplane would be pushed overboard. And General Doolittle asked me if I could fix it, and I said, well, probably, but normally this engine would go into a depot and they would take care of it. But there's a good chance I could fix it. The reason I thought I could fix it, the bottom of this engine has an oil sump on it, and there's a magnetic drain plug in this oil sump. And one day I took that plug out to see if any metal particles came loose inside the engine, and there was two keepers, I call them, sort of a key that held gears in place, stuck to that magnetic plug. This engine had a planetary gear system with 6 little gears around, cuts the crankshaft speed in half. 2 of those keys were on this magnetic plug, so we knew then that the engine couldn't be run anymore. So anyway, I said I probably could fix it. And he said, well, if you can't, we'll push it over the side. So there I was being responsible for having the full 16 airplanes. I almost lost mine. But I wasn't sure. When I said I could probably fix it, I didn't even know how I was going to get it off the airplane. There's a big old 2,000-pound engine up on a flight deck of a carrier, and the Navy had no equipment to help me, so that was a problem. But the Navy came through on that. They got some big timbers and a chain hoist, and we got the engine off, and down to the hangar deck where I'd done the work on it. Taking the engine off was kind of touchy. I couldn't lay anything down on the deck, not a screw, a bolt, not a tool, nothing. It was going right overboard. Well, my friend said, just toss something. you won't have to go on a mission. I didn't want to do that. That was the situation. If I lost anything in the process, it would be the end of it for that airplane. Anyway, I got it all apart, made those keys fit a little tighter on the shaft with a hammer. No spare parts. I couldn't get a new key or anything. They were kind of a horseshoe key that slid over a shaft, so I made them a little, closed the gap in that horseshoe key a little bit and found it in place. Okay. And it worked. So, got the engine back on the airplane, ran it up, ran fine, and it continued to run for our 12-hour mission. So, I sort of became getting the credit for one of the airplanes that might not have made the mission, so I like that. On across the Pacific, we were spotted by a picket ship of some kind, Japanese had out there. And they had radioed into Tokyo about what they seen. So, and the Navy had intercepted some messages. So we had to take off. And this was 400 miles further than we planned to fly. That 400 miles over time is somewhere between 200 and 400, depending on who's telling the story. So there's been a lot of books read and they get stuff different. Anyway, we were told 400 miles, which meant we do not have enough gas to get to China. So that was a little bit sobering right there. So we all took off. Airplane done real well getting off the carrier. We had, say, a little over 400 feet runway, and an awful lot of lift. The carrier was going about 24 or 5 knots, and a headwind of about 30 miles an hour. The acceleration of the airplane, added all that up, and we all got airborne by the end of that 400 feet. And a lot easier than it was in training. All except one guy that rode 30 seconds over Tokyo, Lieutenant Lawson. He didn't have his flaps down, wing flaps. So he slid up kind of off the end of the runway, but he didn't go in the water. He came right close to going in the water, but he made it around. So the airplane done real well, headed for Japan. No navigation equipment. We had a little magnetic compass, like same principle of those you buy in a dime store. It was a little better than that, but it was still just a magnetic compass. And of course, radio silence, no navigation equipment. Originally, we planned to bomb during the night, and we would navigate with celestial navigation, and the navigators were all checked out on that. That was the original plan. See, we had a plan that might have worked. We were going to be within 400 miles of Japan, just bomb during the night, land at dawn in China at a base, and gas up and continue our trip. That plan could have worked. It sounded all right. We didn't get to use it. So now we're faced with an extra 400 miles, and we didn't have. Originally, we only had about 20 minutes extra gas, so we weren't going to make China. Anyway, we continued on to Japan. We approached the coast. The Japanese Navy was out there in force with battleships and Navy ships of all description. There was dozens of them sitting around there in the water. And we were at 1,500 feet altitude. That was the altitude we flew at for the whole mission. Except we flew lower than that getting to the coast. Anyway, they didn't shoot at us. Now, I thoroughly expected to be shot down at that. I did not expect to survive the mission. I mean, the odds really were bad. Over the enemy's capital, low altitude, bright sunshiny day, no defense, no gunners, no fighter escort, none. Expected to be shot down. But I wondered why they didn't shoot at us. Continued on inland and never got shot at. We watched people walk around on the decks of those ships. So that was strange. But it was good. Continued over. Now we bombed 5 cities in Japan. And my city was Kobe. And it was a few miles on past Tokyo. So uneventful, we got over Kobe and found our target, dropped our bombs. Well, our bombing of these targets, we had no bomb sight. The bomb sight that the Army Air Corps had in those days was called the Norden, very sophisticated, high altitude, highly classified bomb sight. We didn't carry it because it's no good at low level, and we didn't want the Japanese to get their hands on one, so we did not have a bomb sight. So one of the pilots, Ross Greening from Tacoma, came up with a gadget that we used instead of a bomb sight, made out of tin. And it looked like kind of like the barrel of a rifle with sights on each end and hinged in the middle over another plate of tin. And he figured out that if we bombed at 200 miles an hour, 1,500 feet, there would be a point at which we should drop our bombs. And he figured that out and put a little stop on that little rifle thing. He said, point that at the target and raise it up as we get close. When you hit that stop, drop the bombs. And that's what they call a 20-cent bomb sight. And it worked. We hit our target okay with it. So then they started some anti-aircraft fire about the time we dropped our bombs. And at first I didn't know what those big black puffs of smoke was showing up around our airplane. But we soon figured out that was they were shooting at us. But we hadn't seen any war movies yet. So that's why I didn't know what it was like. Well, I don't think we got hit because we didn't feel anything. Didn't get to look our airplane over. So we continued after we dropped our bombs, and I had that fire, that 2 fighter planes or small airplanes of some kind followed us for a ways. And then they turned off and went somewhere else. So that's the type of close call we had right at that point. The reason we didn't get shot down was because the Japanese hierarchy made some bad mistakes. When they learned that we were out there 800 miles or so, they thought they knew every airplane that we had that could operate off a carrier. And if you're going to reach Japan and get back to the carrier, you had to get within 200 miles of Japan, which meant they had plenty of time to talk about it. They didn't know we had bombers. We were never going back to the carrier. We had longer range airplanes and we were on our way. So they thought they had time to talk about it. And you couple that with the mindset that they had in those days was that they could not be hit. So they were taking their time figuring out what to do about the situation as we were dropping our bombs. I pretty much dropped all the bombs and got out of there before any serious resistance. Some of the airplanes had some problem with fighters. There was a few bullets exchanged, but we all made it except one airplane that went to Russia to Vladivostok. He ran out of gas so fast, he just went over there. The rest of them all made the Chinese coast. We had a headwind programmed that meant we could not reach China. We didn't have enough gas to get to China. Now, this is kind of strange, but somewhere along in that time, that headwind became a tailwind. And everybody made it to the Chinese coast because somehow that wind changed directions. You could speculate on that. You know. Anyway, I didn't know it at the time, but we found out later that that did happen. So we got close to China. It's getting late in the evening, somewhere around 9 o'clock, I suppose. Started to get dusk. We were basically out of gas, and we spotted some land. It was an island, but we didn't know it. We thought maybe it was the mainland. Anyway, pilot decided to ditch, sit down in the water. It was storming, cloudy and everything, and we're basically out of gas. And to bail out of the airplane, we had to climb to a little higher altitude. We had to fly until we ran out of gas and hope that we were not over water. And hope we didn't land in a prison camp of some kind, a Japanese camp. So I decided to sit down in the water. We ditched there in the China Sea. Airplane done real good. We bounced along the waves a little bit and came to rest, stayed level, floated. Airplane floated for about 10 minutes. Time for us to get out of the airplane, get our life raft, and get organized. And everything was going okay at that point. So the airplane, plexiglass nose on the airplane broke in and it would fill up with water very fast. And I was in the back end of the airplane at that time to launch the life raft. So when I launched the life raft, I had released inside the airplane. I had a coat on, I couldn't get out the hatch. I was supposed to get out of the airplane. It's about full of water by now. So I stopped and took off my coat and crawled through the hole and made it out of the airplane. I've always been glad that I didn't panic, you know. That would have been a good spot to panic in, but I didn't. Got outside the airplane and realized then that I didn't know how to swim. Going downhill a little bit. So while I was floundering around there in the airplane, that thought crossed my mind just real quick. Here I am in the China Sea, I can't swim. But it didn't take long. I remembered to pull a cord and inflate my life jacket. So I was okay there. And we got up on the airplane. And when I always like to think that I should have had a Purple Heart at this point. As I crawled through that hole getting out of the airplane, it nicked my ear. Wounded in combat, right? That's my Purple Heart. Anyway, it never happened. The little nick in my ear happened. No Purple Heart. So we got in the life raft. The airplane's still floating. We decided to push off. Bombardier had already swam to land. He figured he could make it about a half mile, I guess. So he swam and he made it. The other four got in the life raft. The airplane started going down nose first, and the flight control aileron came along and snagged a hole in one side of our life raft. We lost all the inflation in half of the raft. Now we had a canvas bag full of air with a rope attached to it, and I can't swim. So I hung on that rope all the way ashore, and bag, help me on shore, all right? We all made it to the shore. We didn't know exactly where we were or what to do, you know. We started walking. It became daylight, and we ran into Chinese. This island turned out to be an island inhabited by Chinese fishermen. Of course, they didn't know anything about us. And we were trying to communicate with some of those guys, and somebody showed up with a book that had all the flags of the countries in the world in this book, and we found our flag, and they accepted that as being a friend. So fishermen took us across that island into their fishing boat, and we rowed over across the water to another island. And it was a little bit complicated. The Japanese occupied this island. They occupied any place they wanted to be, but this was one of the islands that they went on shore during the day and harassed the people and stole food, chickens or whatever was there. And then at night they'd go around the boat, around the island in a gunboat. So we had to kind of time how long it took them to get around the island to know when to start. That fisherman rowing his boat, and that worked out. So we got to the second island, still not the mainland. On the second island, we had our first close call with the soldiers, Japanese soldiers. We walked up a pretty high hill and to a pagoda, and there was an old guy in there, apparently the minister, and he was the only person around. So we were trying to communicate with him, and that wasn't easy. But he was apparently trying to figure out what to do about us. So he had a tin can, little, bigger than this bottle, with sticks sticking out of it, about as long as a chopstick. And these sticks had writing on them. And he shook this tin can until 2 sticks fell out. And then he read what it said on those 2 sticks. And apparently, the right 2 sticks fell out. That was we wondered, I assumed the other sticks had different stuff written on them. Anyway, he decided that we should stay there a while. He slid back a wall in that building, and we went into a cave, about 12, 15 foot diameter cave. And we spent several hours there. And the Japanese soldiers came, and we heard them yelling and stomping around up there. And the roof of the cave had a crack in it about 3 or 4 inches wide. I started watching the soldiers' feet go by. So that was the situation. There was a Chinese man in the cave with us. I should call him a guerrilla. I'm not sure what his status was, but he had a rifle and he had an ammunition belt, a cloth belt that wrapped around him a few times, and I looked at that and I thought that must be probably 12 feet long, that ammunition belt, full of bullets. Then I got looking a little closer, and it had bullets all the way from like a 22 caliber to a shotgun shell. Then I wondered if any of those bullets would fit his gun. And the gun didn't look like a brand new gun either. So anyway, he was there to do what he could, and as luck would have it, he didn't have to do anything, but he would have tried, I'm sure. After 2 or 3 hours or so, the soldiers left without finding us. And they knew we were there. The old minister showed us our footprints, and we had the only shoes on that island with heels. And we were tracked up to that building by our footprints. So they knew we were there, because the footprints stopped right there. But they gave up. I often wondered why they didn't just really ransack that building and tear it down, you know. But I guess they decided against that. Anyway, they left and we went on our way. And we did a little barefoot walking once in a while after that. If there's any mud around, we didn't want to leave any footprints. So then we discovered that we're on another island. And the fisherman again offered to drive us to what turned out to be the mainland. So we were warned, somewhere along the line, we were warned that there was bandits in those waters. So partway across the water there, getting to the mainland, we were stopped by some bandits. And it was kind of dark out there. And they yelled at the guy running the boat for a while, but they never decided to come aboard that fishing boat. We were laying under a tarp in the bottom of the boat. That was a kind of a close call there. They decided not to bother with that fishing boat and went on somewhere else. That was kind of a close call. So we made it to the mainland, and we found out from the local Chinese there that another airplane had landed close by. And it turned out to be Ted Lawson's airplane from the book 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. He had tried to land on a beach on another island. He seen a good-looking stretch of sand there, thought he could land. And as he came in for his landing gear down, he decided to make a go-round. So when he advanced the throttles, both engines quit. The engines were still set on that maximum lean setting that we all use to save gas. And he hadn't thought to change the carburetor controls. So the engines both quit. Airplane wheels down, hit the water, turned upside down in the water. Everybody was thrown out of the airplane except the crew chief. And he was back where he's supposed to be for crash landing, so he didn't get hurt. The bombardier went through the plastic nose. Co-pilot went through the top, banged the hatches open with their heads, I guess, and went out. The bombardier followed them, or the navigator followed them. And they got all banged up in the process. So they were all thrown out of the airplane except the crew chief. And he was disoriented. The airplane was upside down, and he didn't realize it for a while. And it finally occurred to him that it was upside down, and then he found a way to get out. And he helped those other four guys. They were in about waist deep water. He helped them all to shore. Nobody could really walk. And the pilot, Ted Lawson, one of his knees was completely shattered. He said he left it on the dashboard in the airplane. You know. Anyway, the Chinese showed up with some carrier chairs where we sat in a chair and put poles on each side of the chair, and the guys would carry you down the road. Took those guys down to a little hospital in another town, and that's where we caught up with them. And Dr. White, who amputated Lawson's leg because his knee was so bad the infection set in, was on our ship. Out of the 16 airplanes, these two airplanes landed closer together than any other two airplanes. So that was good luck for Lieutenant Lawson, because the doctor was able to get to him and amputate his leg. The hospital had practically no facilities. It was just a little building. I had a little morphine. The doctor, our doctor was not a surgeon. He was our flight surgeon. He was the MD. So he went ahead and amputated Lawson's leg because he kind of knew what to do. You know. I had a little bit of morphine for anesthetic. The lieutenant was waking up while they were still sewing up. From from the surgery. So after that, we left the doctor and those 4 guys in that little hospital, and we headed for Chongqing. That was the capital of China, walking. There's no roads, no transportation, no bus, no train, no cars, nothing in that part of China. Everything was done on foot. So, stop for a second. Yeah, we encountered a Chinese teenager. He was about 14, 15 years old. His family had been killed in the bombing of Shanghai. He spoke a little English, so we had him stay with us. He was homeless out on the trail. He became our interpreter, our flute scrounger, and our navigator. So we owed this kid big time we got where we were going, because we didn't know much about how to proceed. We were just going to walk and see what happened, and see what we ran into. There was no, in those days, no escape and evasion, emergency rescues, and all this kind of stuff that we came to know later in the war was nothing. We hadn't even been briefed on getting out of the airplane or making a water landing. So we were on our own, ran into this teenager, and he stayed with us. So things were looking a little better at that point. We managed to get a ride on a little charcoal burning bus for a few miles one time. Had a little stove of some kind hanging on the back end of the bus. It turns that charcoal into combustible fuel for the engine. We had to push it up a couple of hills. And there was fighter planes circling overhead. And we thought we'd better get out of this bus. So we stopped the bus and ran into some trees. There was another bus that looked the same ahead of us on the trail, 100 yards or more. And the fighter planes came down and shot it up. So they picked on the wrong bus. So we were okay then. We got back on the bus and kept going. And pretty uneventful. We finally came to a town called Hangyang, where we hoped to get picked up. We were basically, sort of hitchhiking. There was nothing organized to help us. Even the Chinese had nothing organized that they could use to help us. Japanese came over and bombed the runway at this little town every morning around 10 o'clock. Bombed the runway. And when they left, hundreds of Chinese showed up with buckets of rocks, filled all the craters, and the runway was open again. That's the runway where we were hoping somebody could get in and pick us up from, which did finally happen. But we had another kind of close call. We went down the river about a quarter mile or so. There was a pagoda on a little hill there, and we used to walk down there, get up in that pagoda and watch them bomb the city every morning. That went on for a few days. And then somebody said, we probably shouldn't keep doing this. But we were always wondering if we would get discovered by the Japanese. So that was the last day we did it. And a day or two later, the airplanes strafed that pagoda. So that was our last close call. We got picked up by a C-47. The only cargo airplane we owned in World War II was the C-47. Everything went by surface transportation, boat, truck, rail, whatever. So we were picked up by the C-47, went to Chongqing. We were guests of Generalissimo and Madame Chiang Kai-shek there at the capital. The general had to go fight the war, so his wife, entertained us for a day or two there while I was waiting to figure out how to get going again. And Johnny decided to give us a medal, which was very equivalent to our Distinguished Flying Cross. It was for people who'd done things flying. And Madam was pinning that medal on a half dozen of us guys standing there. And I didn't know it, but somebody was filming it. So I was married at the time. The wife lived in Tacoma while I was gone. She had no idea where I was. One day she went to a movie. And in those days, the Movietone News, Movietone Reels was shown between the movies. That's where they got their war news and stuff. She's sitting there watching this newsreel, and I appeared on it. Biggest life that I was. That's how she found out where I was. And she found out with me having to break security. I have nothing to do with that. That's how she went and got her mother. They sat through a couple of movies, made sure they seen what they seen. It's almost unbelievable. You can imagine her state of mind. So that was chunking. We flew over the hump, over the Himalayan mountains into Calcutta, India, in a C-47. Which is a pretty popular airplane around here, I heard. I had to go to 17,000 feet to get through those mountains. And the airplane should have had oxygen above 12,000 feet. So we started wondering about that. Pilot, co-pilot had oxygen. The pilot said, not to worry, we do this every day. If you get a little drowsy, just go to sleep, you ain't dying. So, that's where it went. We were still hitchhiking. We got on a little freight train to go to Chongqing to New Delhi, which was their capital. Went about 20 miles an hour in this little freight car with the coal smoke coming in through the doors. We finally got to New Delhi, it's their capital, and then we got picked up there by C-47 and flown to Cairo and on to West Africa. Eventually we got a ride on a Navy PBY to get from West Africa to Brazil. It flew non-stop across the Atlantic. We all just laid down at the bottom of the hull there. And that worked fine. Then we were picked up in Brazil by Americans again with C-47s and came on up the coast to Washington, D.C. That's kind of the end. Getting towards the end of the story, but there's a story I like to tell. And sometimes people kind of like it. My wife found out that she went to visit my folks in Montana. We'd just been there. They'd never seen her, a picture or anything. She decided to go down to the ranch and visit my family while I was coming home from overseas. She did. She sent him a telegram telling him she was coming. And I got on the train, got off in Miles City, Montana, found out there was no transportation. Our little town of Jordan, 87 miles, no bus, no nothing. But you can ride the mail truck. So she rode the mail truck out to Jordan the next day, and a neighbor happened to be in town, took her out to the ranch. And while she's explaining who she was to my family, who had never even seen a picture, the mail came. And in the mail bag was her telegram. She beat it to the ranch by 2 or 3 hours. So I was wondering how come nobody here to meet me, you know. Anyway, that's the story I got. And that pretty well covers the range and my experience. I'm sure I've left out some stuff, but know what it was. I won't worry.
Okay, we do have some time for some questions. Again, our docent Paula Clark has the mic. If you have a question, just raise your hand and she'll work it to you, and then you can ask the question from your seat. We have some time for that, so we'll go from there. Okay?
You may have to repeat the question.
Sure.
We'll do that. Aries?
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. It's a very amazing story. The question I had is, do you recall what you were feeling when you had released the bombs over Japan? Did you feel a sense of relief? Did you feel a sense of urgency to get out of this place? Do you recall that particular moment?
Oh, yeah. I just started to let up. Yeah, I remember that. I guess we're going to make it out of Japan. Then we began to think about the trip across the China Sea. Yeah, that was one of the bright spots. We knew we were going to survive being over Japan.
Our next question's over here.
I'm curious as to at what point during the war or after all those who survived the raid could have got back together and started trading stories. I have an indirect connection to Jake DeShazer,
Oh, yeah.
and wondering, what you learned when you finally got to talk to each other.
You mentioned Jake DeShazer, that's something I forgot. The Japanese captured 8 of us. 3 guys died landing, 2 drowned, and 1 guy shoot Doolittle. The Japanese caught 8 of us, and they were prisoners. They had a trial in the Japanese language where they obviously were found guilty of whatever it was they wanted to charge with. And they took 3 of the guys out to firing squad and executed them after the trial. That's how they were. Those guys were no threat. They didn't need to do that. Anyway, they did. And a 4th guy died from a disease in a prison camp. And that left the 4. And they're the subject of a book written by one of them titled 4 Came Home. And that's a pretty heavy reading book if you ever get a chance to see it, about their life. I forget how it was from April to the end of the war during that prison camp. And they were treated worse than you can imagine. So that's a good book to read about. Yeah, we swapped stories now and then all the time. Of course, a lot of stories showed up in different books written by different members of our crew.
Another question back here.
Thank you for sharing your story, sir. When General Doolittle took off from the Hornet, the first plane off on the raid, was that the first time a B-25 had taken off from a carrier, or had they been able to actually try it beforehand? I know the mission was secret, but had anybody flown a B-25 from an actual carrier?
Well, there was some sort of a test made by the Navy of getting off early in a B-25, but I don't think it was from a carrier. As far as I know, he was the first, and it was up front, it was considered pretty much impossible. And of course, Doolittle he was a genius at that kind of stuff. He figured it out, how to make it work.
We have a question right here in the front.
Thank you for speaking with us today. Thank you for speaking with us today. Did you ever reward the people who had helped you?
You know what?
Ever reward or contact the people who helped you?
I can't understand the question.
Did you ever reward or contact the people that helped you escape?
No, not really, but there was something that happened in that regard of our Chinese people that helped us escape. One of the officers of Northwest Airlines went over to China and found people who had helped 5 of the different crews and brought those people back to the States. And we had a little celebration and gave them a medal. That's been my only contact. But one of the women that came was the wife of one of the fishermen that helped me on the first island. So that's all we were able to do.
The next question is right here. Wayne has a question.
In Lawson's book, there is a picture of a number of the pilots outside of a cave. Were you one of those in his book?
Yeah. That cave was in that town where we finally got picked up.
I understand that Doolittle thought that the raid might be regarded as a failure, that he had lost all his planes, lost all his pilots, that he would be court-martialed.
Yeah, that's the situation there, yeah. His crew chief told him, you're not going to be court-martialed, you're going to get the Medal of Honor, which he did. But he lost all his airplanes, so he worried about how it would be receiving airplanes.
Here's another question right here.
This is a silly question. How many people were aboard each airplane?
5.
5. Thank you.
We had a pilot, a co-pilot, a bombardier, and we had a doctor instead of a navigator. Most of the airplanes had a navigator, and the flight engineer, 5.
Another question right here in the front row, Ed. Right here.
Do you remember the first time or the first moment that you actually met Doolittle? And what was the thing that hit you, the first impression in that sense?
I don't really understand your question.
What did you think when you first met General Doolittle?
Oh, I'd never heard of him. I lived out in the country, we didn't know anything. No, I came to know him now. He was everything his reputation says. He was really good. He had it all figured out, how it could work. Could work. He was good at that.
Okay. Go over here. I'll be over here. Here.
Since you were planning to land in China instead of ditching, did you have any rations along with you to survive? Or were you pretty much, you just had to find something when you landed?
And we didn't have any food on board. Another thing that was kind of lacking in our thinking, I guess. It's been a good idea to take a candy bar or something.
Prior to taking off as carrier, did you all get together for a briefing? And can you tell us a little bit about the briefing if you had one?
No, the briefing consisted of a message on a loudspeaker that said, Army pilots, man your planes and take off. That was our briefing, but we had discussed our worst case scenario, and that's what happened. It was, we talked about if we had to take off, or where could we go, and how far was it to this or that island. So they were thinking all the time, maybe there was something else we could do if we had to, but no real briefing on what actually happened. No.
And the next question is way back here, Ed.
Where did General Doolittle land?
Up in the hills somewhere there, I don't know exactly where he landed. He went to his airplane. He landed close enough to his airplane that the whole crew, I think, walked back to the airplane. But it's somewhere up in the hills.
Now, Ed, I'm way over here now. Way over here. Look up, look to your right. Look to your right. Here.
Oh,
It's just an incredible honor to meet you and to hear. It's kind of chokes me up. But what happened to your 14-year-old translator? Do you have any awareness of what happened to that?
we never could find him. We know his name. We had a picture of him. But we've never found him. I don't know whether he survived or what happened to him. I tried to bring him on the airplane with us when we got picked up, and they said, no civilians. We're going to take him home all the way to the States. We had to get him set up somewhere. Never been found.
Ed, what number airplane were you on?
15. Yeah. And people think I must have had more runway than the other 14 airplanes there, but it didn't work that way. You couldn't make a takeoff run past the tower. There wasn't enough wind clearance for it to be safe. So we all took off from the same spot. 450 feet, I guess.
No, I'm way back here.
Yeah, I got a quick question for you. Where was your aircraft located at on the aircraft carrier? Were you like one of the first ones to take off, or were you further back?
Next to last.
Oh, okay, so you had
Number
lots of
15.
small room.
Yes, you hear various stories that the Japanese killed 250,000 Chinese people for assisting you. Do you agree with that figure? And what was did the people know when they were assisting you that they were putting their lives in peril?
Well, but I heard that there were 250,000 well after the war, and that made me kind of wonder if it was worthwhile. That's all the price that they paid for armies. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's the way they were.
The next question is right here, Ed.
Thank you again for your service. When you got back, all of you got back, or part of you got back, what did the Army Air Corps do with you? I mean, obviously there was a certain amount of propaganda or public relations you did, but were you ever put back in harm's way again? Were you released?
There wasn't much of a fuss made publicly. People found out about the raid, and it was a big morale boost across the country. I spent the rest of the war in Europe. The raid didn't get much attention during the rest of the war. There was just too much going on around the world, with Normandy and places like that. I kind of forgot about the raid myself until after the war. I was just a lot of guys, had it a lot harder than I ever did. I had a hard time for a short time, but I always thought about infantry every day, all day, getting shot at, and B-17s were flying out of England, terrible losses. So all that stuff made me think that guys are doing a lot more than I did. And over time, over the years, they decided to publicize the raid and attach importance to it that you hear about today. Wasn't that big a deal at the time. We just done a mission. We're really glad that we got away with it. And that was, each airplane carried 4 500-pound bombs, and we weren't going to do much damage with a bomb load like that with 16 airplanes. It wasn't. I wondered about that, but we understood at the time that we were getting back at them.
I have another question over here, Ed, over to your right.
Hi there, sir. It's a pleasure to hear you speak, and I'm an honor. I was wondering, some of the things that I've read about when the picket ships were found, or when the picket ships found you, and you guys received orders to take off immediately. In the interest of lightening the load because of the fuel, I read that people were kind of leaving things behind. Was there anything that you left behind that you kind of went, oh, I should have, you know? Or,
well, that's something that came to our mind in a hurry. We knew that if we got within 400 miles of Japan, that we still only had about 20 or 30 minutes extra fuel to get to our destination. And we knew we weren't there yet when we were supposed to take off. I didn't know how far it was at that point. But we learned it was somewhere around 400 miles extra.
Another question right back here.
Did you have parachutes?
Yeah, we must have had. We carried parachutes in those days. Yeah.
It sounded like some of Doolittle's crew jumped out first before the plane landed,
Well,
and then they.
there's your answer. Everybody had parachutes.
Okay.
I didn't remember them on my airplane, but most of the people did bail out.
Okay, Ed, I have the pleasure of the last question over here. Could you tell us a little bit about your service in Europe in the war, over the war?
Yeah, I spent the rest of the war in Europe. B-26 airplanes. The first night we landed in England at an air raid. First air raid I'd ever really been in, but the sirens are going. Didn't know what to do, so there was a big tree there, middle of the night. I laid down beside that tree, hoped that the bomb was on the other side of it, you know. I didn't know what to do, I laid there. Well, the bombs went off, pretty close, terrible, loud noise. I was covered up with dirt and gravel for a little while. It was that close. But I guess the guys seen me and got me out. I don't remember exactly how I got out of that stuff. That was the first night. Spent the rest of the war in Europe, England, France, and Belgium. I was commissioned in France. That's how come I'm an officer today. Yeah, I was around all that activity somewhere over there. We had the German buzz bomb. It was a little sort of a rocket-propelled bomb that was scheduled to run out of fuel over a target. I don't think it was very accurate, but we were in the flight path there in England. So at night, particularly, the buzz bombs would be going over, and we listened to the noise, because we knew if the noise stopped, the bombs coming down in this area. It never did. But if you got to sleep, you woke up when there was a noise like that. So, we dug some bomb shelters for ourselves there in England, covered over some beams and dirt and stuff, and so we just go out there and spend the evening sleep there instead of in the barracks. We didn't have to worry about the air raids. Didn't have that many air raids. That's what we did. On France and Belgium, kind of following the army a little bit. Nothing really happen to me anymore.
And Ed, how long were you in the service? I'm over here to your right. How long were you in the service then?
28 years.
28 years.
Yeah, I think I mentioned I was commissioned in France. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. Folks, if you are interested in getting a little bit of one-on-one time with our guest, downstairs in the lobby, we have a table set up. We'll be bringing him down there eventually. There's a stairwell outside the door that you came in that you can take downstairs. Some are going down this rear staircase. If you can find your way out, great. Then there's also the elevators. The line will line up starting in the lobby and head out towards the personal courage wing, okay? And we'll have him down there as soon as possible. Thank you for coming.
Gotta wake up today.